Welcome to the Buckeye Battle Cry Show, episode 17 in our first season. I'm your host, Brandon Held. I'm going to be discussing this week's conference championship games. Of course, get in depth in details about the Buckeye versus Indiana Big Ten Conference Championship game. Then I'll get into a discussion of the playoffs and my predictions for the first round of the playoffs. So let's just start with the Big Ten Championship game. It was a surprise to me. It was a tough, hard-fought game full of mistakes and, let's be honest, bad officiating. Let's start with the fact that Indiana did win a low-scoring game, 13-10. And if you're Ohio State and your defense only gives up 13 points, you should win this game. Any game. I don't care who Ohio State's playing against. The defense only giving up 13 points is a game Ohio State should absolutely win. And so, outside of Jermaine Matthews getting beat in big moments by the Indiana wide receiver Becker, who finished the game with 6 catches for 126 yards, the defense played well overall. And in the first half specifically, they were on the field quite a bit. So big turnover that took place, and the defense still only gives up 13 points. So great job by the defense. There were multiple times the Indiana offensive line straight tackled Kenyatta Jackson while he was rushing the quarterback, and the refs just kept the flags in their pockets. Now, if I had the team, it's just me and one editing guy, and we don't have the resources. I don't have the resources. I would pull out those video clips and show them to you and discuss them and prove what I'm talking about is true. So that's why I need you to push this show out and get more viewers for me so I can make this a full-time gig, because without the ability to do that, all I can do is just talk about my frustrations of the plays that I saw in game and bad officiating. I just can't do that right now with the resources I have to do this show. But the officiating was god-awful. And again, some went the other way as well. Indiana fans are complaining that Ohio State's offensive line was holding. Those holds weren't being called. So yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. I didn't notice that as much. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying I didn't notice it as much because I was definitely looking at Indiana's offensive line when Ohio State was on defense. And there was definitely some holding going on that absolutely did not get called, and on scoring drives that Indiana scored points. And that's a big deal. Whether you like it or not, that's a big deal. And I'm not saying that's the reason Ohio State lost the game. But the bad reffing, that's just another typical week in college football. The Buckeyes had another ticky-tack pass interference called against them as well. And then you have to listen to Klatt justify a bad call. I used to like Joel Klatt, and the last couple of weeks, he's really turned me away from being a fan of his and liking what he does. Why is it when I was listening to the game, it sounded like Klatt and Johnson were low-key rooting for Indiana to win this game? Am I the only one that felt that way? Did you feel that way too? I felt that way last week against the team up north, and I felt that way again this week against Indiana. It really has the feel that Klatt and Johnson are rooting against Ohio State. So it's tough to listen to those guys call games, and they call most of the games for Ohio State these days. But back to the game, when you look at the numbers, it was a pretty even game across the board. Indiana had 340 yards total, and Ohio State had 322. Sayan actually outperformed Mendoza when he passed for 264 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception, and Mendoza had 222 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. So while Indiana won the game, Saying still outperformed Mendoza statistically. The running game is where Indiana had the edge. They rushed for 118 yards, and Ohio State only had 58 yards rushing. This is where I want to talk about the real issues and why Ohio State lost this game. Yes, I complained about the officiating, and it was awful. Yes, Indiana was able to move the ball and score without holding penalties being called that should have been called. But Ohio State had chances offensively to win this game. So the Buckeyes have a 4th and 1 late in the third quarter, and the offense calls a quarterback sneak, and Sayin cannot keep his feet off the ground, and his knee hits the ground, and they turn the ball over on downs. Now, I didn't mind the Buckeyes going for it there. It's the end of the third quarter. There's still plenty of game left. You're trying to go take the lead. I'm all good with all of that. I just didn't really care for the quarterback sneak call. Sayin's a small guy. I normally love the quarterback sneak, don't get me wrong, but Sayin's a small guy. I really just would rather them hand the ball off to CJ Donaldson in that situation on a quick handoff, not a 4 yards back. Sayin snaps the ball and has to take 4 steps back to hand the ball. That gives Indiana's defense too much time to penetrate. You put Donaldson in like a fullback situation. You let the offensive line push like they're doing a quarterback sneak, and you let Donaldson make that play. That's what he's there for. I didn't like the quarterback sneak call there, and Ohio State turns the ball over on downs. And then after that, Indiana moves the ball a little bit down the field and then kicks it back to Ohio State. And this is where I got very upset watching the game, and not with the players, but the coaching. The offense gets the ball back, and slowly and methodically, they're moving the ball down the field, taking the full play clock to call plays, and just burning the clock and taking it down to where there's less than 3 minutes left to play, and then they miss a field goal. My question is, why? Like, this is absolutely horrible clock management. Horrible. Football 101, you do not burn the clock and lose time unless you are winning the football game. Like, this is such a basic understanding to me that it is unfathomable that they would allow this to happen. Even if Fielding does make the field goal and you tie the game, which he obviously didn't, and that's why I hate putting a game in kickers' hands, by the way. It was a chip shot field goal, almost an extra point that he absolutely blew and missed. You left Indiana with 3 minutes to drive and kick a game-winning field goal and run down the clock and be the last ones to have the ball. This is a F- grade. Poor clock management by the coaching staff. Poor. Terrible. Ohio State should have been setting themselves up to at least try to have the ball one more time, no matter what happened on the outcome of that drive. Even if they scored a touchdown, let's just say Indiana would have got the ball back and they were able to score the touchdown and take the lead again. You have now lost the game because you didn't give yourself a chance at one more solid possession. It's always better to leave extra time, have the lead, then have Indiana in a situation where they got to go for it on fourth down. They lose the ball, and now you're running out the clock. What happened to the hurry up offense? You know, Day has been asked that question, and he stated, we haven't needed to use it, but it's there if we need to go to it. Well, guess what? You needed to go to it in the fourth quarter, and you didn't use the hurry up offense. I'm yelling at the TV, explaining to my wife and my son that during that drive, the only thing they are doing is taking away time from themselves when they get the ball back. That's all they were doing on that long extended drive, was cutting out their offense's time of possession the next time they get the ball. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. They end up stopping Indiana, making Indiana punt, and they get the ball back with 18 seconds and 0 timeouts. And this didn't have to be the case if they weren't slowly burning the clock and wasting time on their previous drive the last time they had the ball. Now, this is the first loss this season, and to me, it was not a player loss. It was a coaching loss in the end. Yeah, of course, players have to execute, but coaches have to put the players in the position to be successful. Defensively, Matt Patricia did that, but offensively, Day did not do that. You may say, oh, well, Hartline calls the offensive plays. Yeah, but Day decides, are we running a hurry-up offense or are we running our normal offense where we just burn clock while we have the ball? And I really thought that Day had outgrown and learned from dumb mistakes he's made in the past, but clearly he has not. I will also add that Sayan took a lot of sacks, and several times he held on to the ball way too long, and he was not seeing the field clearly again. It was very clear that the defensive scheme of Indiana had him confused at times, and he was afraid to pull the trigger and let the ball go because he didn't want to turn the ball over. You can't coach conservatively and you can't be afraid to let the ball go when you need plays to win a game. I said it before, he's a freshman and he has plenty of room to grow and learning how to read defenses and get better. And he will grow and get better. Hats off to Indiana. They're the Big Ten champs, maybe the best team in the country. To me, Ohio State has the best players in the country on the team. But make no mistake about it, Indiana's coaching staff outcoached Ohio State's coaching staff in this game. Fortunately, there is still the playoffs for Ohio State to possibly atone for this loss and win it all again back to back, which makes the sting of this loss just a little less than maybe it would have in the past when your hopes for a national championship would be over after a loss in the Big Ten championship. But Ohio State certainly has some work to do to get better and learn from their mistakes as players and coaches before that can happen. I have said all season long and still wholeheartedly believe the Big Ten has the best three teams in the country, and that's Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon. Moving on to the second best conference in college football, the ACC. Just kidding. The SEC. Most likely, also, there is a good possibility that Texas Tech is the fourth best team in the country, or maybe the third. Alabama earned their way into the SEC championship, and Georgia backdoored their way somehow over Ole Miss and A&M. Even though all four teams had one conference loss, I'm not really sure how that worked out, but that was the game you had. Alabama barely squeaked by a horrible Auburn team the week before. They haven't looked very good as of late. Alabama has not. And then Georgia barely beats Georgia Tech, a team the previous week who got wrecked by Pitt. So I didn't know what to think of Georgia or Alabama going into this game. I knew Georgia had flashes of looking good lately, and Bama had looked like they had gone a little backwards in the season prior to the SEC championship game. But I also knew Kirby Smart was 1-7 against Alabama and 0-2 specifically against DeBoer. So I had to believe that mentally Bama had the edge going into this game. However, when the game was played out, it was all Georgia, and Bama was never in the game, except for when it was 0-0. After Georgia scored the first touchdown, it was all Georgia after that. It really came down to one thing on each side of the ball, and that was the offensive and defensive line. Now, neither team wows you with their defensive secondary, or Georgia's receivers aren't really that great, and Georgia's ability to throw the ball downfield does not scare you. But Georgia's offensive line held up to the tune of 141 yards rushing, and Stockton only had 156 passing yards. But he did throw 3 touchdown passes when they were close to the end zone, and Bama's offensive line was just awful. Bama finished this game with -3 yards rushing. Finished the game -3 yards rushing. And Ty Simpson, who was supposed to be a Heisman candidate at one point, was running for his life, and he never looked comfortable the entire game. He went 19 for 39 for 212 yards, a touchdown, and 1 interception. So he had 39 pass attempts to get 212 yards. Alabama should not be in the playoffs. And this game further proved that to be true. It was not a competitive game. And Bama is supposedly one of the 2 best teams in the SEC since they made it into the conference championship game. So at this point, I'm sure everyone knows who's in the playoffs and what seed they are, but I will go over that later in the show. All right, let's quickly go over the Big 12 conference championship game. There's not a lot to say here. It was total domination by Texas Tech, 34-7. BYU had 4 turnovers in this game, and you know how I feel about turnovers. Typically the biggest predictor of who's going to win a football game. Not always true. Like when the team up north played Northwestern earlier this year, they had 5 turnovers and still won the game. But in this case, you know, BYU's quarterback Brockmeyer, he threw 2 interceptions to the same linebacker, Roberts, on Texas Tech, who ended up being player of the game, and Texas Tech also forced 2 fumbles. Texas Tech, they are legitimate national championship contenders. They have a great front 7 on defense. And any team with a great front 7 has a chance in every football game. To me, the way they worked the portal, and you heard a lot of good things about what they did going into the season. The question was, could they put it all together and play as a team? Well, we have our answer. Yes, they can, and they have. So there's not much more to say about it except good luck, because Texas Tech is going to be tough in the playoffs, and they are legit. And I'll go over that more later as well. Finally, the conference game that nobody really took seriously, and that is the ACC and their championship game. Now, if you're an ACC fan and you get offended by that, then you should rethink how you feel about your own conference. I mean, Duke was 7-5 going into this game. They played 10-2 Virginia, another conference where there were multiple 2-loss in conference teams, 5 to be exact. They had 5 teams that only lost twice in conference games. And Miami is clearly the conference's best team, and they did not get in to the conference championship game. They didn't lose to Duke, so the tiebreaker system is a head scratcher. And if I had a team in the ACC, I would look at them and want to know, like, how did that happen? Explain it to me. Since I don't know the ACC that well, and I don't have a team of people to work with who can explain the nuclear physics that is their tiebreaker system, somehow Duke at 7-5 not only gets into the conference championship game, but wins the conference championship and is an 8-5 team in conference championship winners of the ACC. So yeah, if you're an ACC fan, that's why the rest of college football doesn't take you seriously. You have an 8-5 conference champion, and the best team in the conference, the Miami Hurricanes, don't even get in, even though they have the same amount of losses as Duke and Virginia. There you have it, the 4 major conference champions. I had my first losing week on picks for the entire season. And remember, I picked the toughest games every week, and I went 1-3. So now the playoffs begin with things even less clear in my mind than ever before. And so if you put that 1-3 up against last week's record, I was 54-24 on the season. Now I'm 55-27 overall. I still think it's a pretty great record considering I'm picking the toughest games every week. But, you know, last week stung a little bit. These championship games didn't really go the way I saw them going, because who expected a 7-5 Duke team to win? Of course, as an Ohio State fan, I didn't expect Indiana to win. And I knew Alabama and Georgia was a toss-up, so I went with Alabama based off of the history of those two. So it was a rough week with picks overall.
Hey, quick time out here. Please take a moment to just subscribe, comment, and like. If you do all three of those things, you'll really help me out in getting the word out for this show. Help me hopefully gain a larger audience. I would greatly appreciate it. So comment, like, and subscribe, please. And go Bucks.
But now it's time to discuss playoffs. And I'm going to spend the rest of the show just talking about the playoffs and my first round predictions. I'm not going to sit here and predict the full bracket. I will take it week by week until the national championship. I mean, I get it. It's fun for shows for you to sit there and listen to a guy make picks and then, most likely be terribly wrong. So you can go back and, make fun of them or give them a hard time. But it doesn't show your football knowledge by necessarily doing better or worse, because we don't know. None of us, me, you, anyone that's predicting these games, we don't know what teams are doing in practice. We don't know what team's going to show up that day. Are they going to be tight? Are they going to be loose? Have they fixed things like their offensive line play? You just don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and you don't know who's going to show up that day. These are kids. It's really, really hard to predict what's going to happen. All you can do is make your best guess based off the information you have available. So as you can see, Indiana is the number 1 seed. No surprise. After winning the Big Ten championship. Ohio State is the number 2 seed, and the rest you probably already know. Now, I predicted months ago that after Indiana beat Oregon, if Ohio State and Indiana ended up on separate sides of the bracket, I didn't necessarily think it would be 1 and 2. Yeah, it could have been 1 and 4. I thought the Big Ten championship game would be a potential national championship rematch. Of course, I thought Ohio State would have won the Big Ten championship game and they would be the number 1. But nevertheless, the fact that Indiana did win just gives me more confidence that they have what it takes to win the first 2 games in the playoffs and make it to the national championship game. Because I know Ohio State has what it takes. It's just a matter of, does the coaching do what they need to do to get Ohio State there like they did last season? And frankly, I think Texas Tech, who is the 4 seed, is better than Georgia. So no way would I consider that an easy game for Indiana. The other great news on a personal level is that second game for Ohio State is in the Fiesta Bowl in Glendale, Arizona, potentially against Georgia if they win their first game. And since I live in Arizona, I will be at that football game to see it in person. So let's discuss the first round games. I will start with number 5, Oregon versus number 12, James Madison. Now, Oregon, who I have stated multiple times, is one of the best teams in the country. And James Madison, who played Washington State, needed a late touchdown to win this game by 4 points. And that was just a few weeks ago. So I'm sure JMU will show up and give it their best effort. But Oregon is just too talented and they're just too much. And I expect Oregon to win this game pretty easily, very easily. So I'm obviously taking Oregon to win this game. Next game is number 6 Ole Miss versus number 11 Tulane. This game is a rematch. If you don't know, Ole Miss won the first game by 5 touchdowns in a rout. So while I expect Tulane to show up and play a little harder and do a little better, I also expect Ole Miss to win this game pretty easily. I don't think this game is going to be even close. I don't think Oregon versus JMU is going to be close. But again, like I said before, these are kids. You never know who's going to show up on game day and what you're going to get. All right, next game, number 7, Texas A&M versus number 10, Miami. Let me just start with Miami belongs in the playoffs. Head-to-head matters in close decisions between them and Notre Dame. It just does. I believe the committee made the right decision on this one. I do not agree with all of them, but this one they got right. And Texas A&M lost the last game they played against Texas, and they did not look good. Miami, after a couple hiccups earlier in the season, they've looked very good the last couple months. That doesn't mean that Texas A&M can't recover and win this football game against Miami. But if you look at Texas A&M's wins on the entire season, the one quality win that they have is Notre Dame, their third game of the season. Otherwise, they played pretty much the bottom half of the SEC teams except for Missouri, who they beat, and then they lost to Texas, who beat them pretty handily. And if you think A&M is good, I actually think A&M is an unproven football team. I believe Miami has one of the best defenses in college football. And the only thing that gives me pause is the home field advantage, which is huge. Texas A&M is at home in this game, but if you put this game at a neutral site, I think Miami wins this game by 2 touchdowns. But at A&M, that's a different animal. But I still like Miami, not by a lot. But I will pick Miami in this situation to advance and move on past Texas A&M in a close game at Texas A&M. All right, and finally in the first round, number 8 Oklahoma against number 9 Alabama. Now this is a rematch game, but this time they get to play it in Oklahoma's house. Oklahoma won the first game, if you don't remember, and they did it in Tuscaloosa. Let me start by saying that Alabama does not belong in the playoffs. They do not. This is not a punishment for losing to Georgia. I felt like Alabama had to beat Georgia to earn their way in. And this should be Notre Dame's spot instead. Wouldn't you rather see Notre Dame going to Oklahoma for this playoff game? I know I would. That running game of Notre Dame's against Oklahoma's defense, man, that would be a really good game. That would have been a great game to watch. But here we are. I'm sure in no way there's any SEC bias on the committee's part with 5 SEC teams in the playoff. I say that in jest, of course. While Notre Dame sits at home and watches. So unlike some other people, Josh Pate, for example, who admires Notre Dame's independence and has no problem with it, I do have a problem with it. I believe they need to join a conference and go through the same grind that the rest of college football deals with. Unless, of course, that conference is the ACC, because the ACC is awful. I mean, 8-5 Duke, conference champions, need I say more? I wish the committee would just come out and say it straight up, though. Like, Notre Dame, join a conference and be conference champions and you are in. But they probably won't, and nothing will change. I digress. Back to this game. It's virtually a no-brainer to me. Oklahoma may have one of the worst offenses in the playoffs, if not the worst offense in the playoffs, except for the way recently Alabama has played. Alabama's offensive line has been god awful, and they cannot run the ball, aka -3 yards total against Georgia for an entire game. And Ty Simpson has no time to throw to a very talented group of wide receivers. And even if he does, they can drop so many into coverage that because Alabama can't run, it doesn't matter. So Oklahoma wins this one, and probably pretty easily, I would say by 10 or more. So if you look at the overall college football playoff bracket, did the committee get this right? Do you think the committee got this right? I look at it and I say, not even no, but hell no. Like, 3 of these games will most likely not even be competitive. And A&M against Miami is the only one that looks like we won't know who's going to win by the third quarter. Notre Dame, Texas, BYU are all better options than Tulane, JMU, and Alabama. That's not something I normally would say about Alabama because I respect their program and the house that Saban built, but they are not it this year. And the SEC championship game was just further proof. Georgia is not that good. They cannot pass the ball. They are the Michigan of the SEC, and they routed Alabama. So yeah, the playoff system to me is still broken. Not the 12 part, but the automatic bids and committee choices are just not top tier. They're just not. People thinking someone like Josh Pate becoming the president and letting him make decisions would be the answer. And I like Josh Pate, don't get me wrong, but he would have Alabama in there too. And Alabama does not belong. In a 12-team playoff system, 5 teams from any conference does not belong. And I'm saying that as a Big Ten fan. And under the current system, there will come a time, if this system stays around, that 5 Big Ten teams will look like they belong and be in the playoffs. USC has the number 1 recruiting class this year. Oregon has the number 2 recruiting class this year. Ohio State ended up number 6, and they're always in it. Kirk Cignetti is doing amazing things at Indiana, regardless of how they recruit. And you throw in a good year for the team up north or Nebraska or Iowa or whomever. And I will say 5 teams from one conference do not belong in the playoffs. But the precedence has been set by the committee, and there's a need to fix the current system, and adding more teams and making the playoffs bigger is not the answer. This is football, not basketball. The season is long enough. The game takes a toll on players' bodies. You're not going to get a strong version of any team 18 games into the season of college football. And that idea to me is downright ridiculous. So, I mean, listen, I love college football as much or more than most people. It's the only sport I watch. I used to play and watch them all. I was a pitcher in baseball. I played multiple positions in football on offense and defense. I was a shooting guard in basketball. I used to play on an Air Force traveling volleyball team and played volleyball. And I watched all the sports, NFL, NBA, college basketball, Major League Baseball, you name it, I watched it. But I have since, as I've gotten older, dwindled those all down to just college football. And I started a show. There is no debating how much I love college football. And as a viewer, more games would be amazing. But that doesn't mean I think it's the right thing to do. And that's the difference. All right, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Give me your picks, why you think they're right, that you are right. Not just because you're a fan of the team. You know, all I get from people are just fans talking about their team and how I'm wrong about their team, especially Georgia fans. I'm not a big believer in Georgia. They're the number 3 seed. I don't think they should be the number 3 seed. And we can argue about that all day long. Their clapback is always Ohio State and Indiana didn't play anybody, blah, blah, blah. Well, the playoffs is about to begin, and they're about to see what the Big Ten is for real. So you let me know if you think the committee got this right, and this looks like the first round of playoffs that you look forward to. I mean, I know I don't. I'll watch them, but I have low expectations because I don't like the matchups. They're all pretty much blowout games except for the one, Miami and A&M, like I said. So thank you for watching and listening to the Buckeye Battle Cry Show. You can also listen to me weekly anywhere you find podcasts if you can't get onto YouTube. But if you are listening to me somewhere else or you're watching me on YouTube right now, please subscribe. Please. I would love to have the ability to make money doing this show and build a team and bring you higher quality content or do live shows someday. I would love to do all that, and I need your support. And thank you for those who have been watching thus far and who have subscribed. Please keep watching, keep subscribing. It costs you nothing but your time. And I'm not saying your time is free. But we all have a little time to enjoy some entertainment about college football. And I appreciate you giving me that time to watch this show. So until next time, bleed scarlet and gray, go Bucks.